The laughter broke first, sharp, silvery and cruel. It rippled through the ballroom like shattered glass, slicing through the music and the fragile composure of the Duchess of Ravensmere. Lady Eleanor stood at the edge of the grand hall, her gloved hands clasped before her, her smile thin as porcelain. Every whispered jest found its mark. Poor thing, untouched still, they say. The words coiled like smoke around her, unseen but suffocating. Beneath the crystal chandeliers, she felt the walls of English propriety close in, gilded and merciless. Her husband was not there, he never was, and his absence had become her scandal. The Duke of Ravensmere was a ghost in the shape of a man, a figure both feared and admired. They said he had saved England in silence, serving in shadows where kings dared not tread. They also said he had returned home colder than the marble corridors of his estate. Whatever remained of his heart had been buried with his former betrothed, the woman whose portrait he still kept locked away. Now that same heart belonged to no one, certainly not to the woman who bore his name. The orchestra resumed, yet Eleanor's world did not. Every bow drawn across a violin felt like a reprimand. She curtsied, exchanged hollow pleasantries and smiled through pitying eyes. The Duchess's beauty was often praised in society, her softness, her composure, but beauty in England's high circles was a currency that could buy only scrutiny. A single glance of disfavor from a husband could turn admiration into cruelty overnight. And so it had. Outside the ballroom, rain pressed against the tall windows like restless ghosts. Somewhere beyond London's flickering lamps, Ravensmere Manor slept under a different kind of silence, one born of secrets, not peace. It was there her husband awaited her return, or so she hoped. In truth, she knew better. The Duke's love was not cruel but absent, and absence can wound deeper than contempt. That night, when the carriages rolled through the soaked cobblestones and laughter faded behind her, Eleanor leaned back against the velvet seat and closed her eyes. The scent of wet roses clung to her gown, mingling with tears she refused to shed. The driver's whip cracked once, and Ravensmere's looming silhouette drew nearer with each turn of the wheel. He was waiting for her, not in welcome but in ritual. The Duke stood by the hearth, his back turned, one hand resting upon the mantel as though holding the entire weight of the manor upon his shoulders. The fire cast a restless glow across the room, tracing the lines of a man carved from restraint. When Eleanor entered, the rustle of her gown was the only sound between them. "You were at Lady Somerton's ball," he said, his tone neither inquiry nor accusation but something colder. "Yes," she replied softly. "I was invited." His eyes lifted then, pale gray and distant, like winter skies over the moors. "And was it worth it? To stand before them and let them whisper?" "They would whisper regardless," she said, her voice trembling despite her resolve. "Better that I stand where I am seen, than fade quietly into pity." He turned fully, and the sight of him still took her breath away, though she despised herself for it. Alexander Blackthorne, Duke of Ravensmere, was every inch the nobleman England adored from afar. Yet up close he was a ruin disguised as marble. "You do not understand what they are," he said lowly. "Those people feed on ruin. You give them what they crave." "I give them nothing," she whispered. "It is you who gives them silence." Something flickered in his gaze then, an echo of pain swiftly hidden. He set down his glass, the faintest tremor betraying his restraint. "Eleanor, I have warned you before. Stay away from them. Stay away from me." Her heart stilled. "You wish me gone?" He did not answer. Instead, he moved to the window, staring into the dark as rain streaked the glass. His reflection blurred in the pain, half man, half memory. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost weary. "I cannot offer what you think marriage should be. There are things I have done, things that make peace impossible." "Peace is not what I ask," she said, stepping closer, every word trembling between defiance and despair. "I ask for honesty. If you cannot love me, say so plainly. Let me at least live without the ghost of hope." His jaw clenched. "You would rather I lie?" "I would rather you see me." The fire cracked, throwing shadows like accusations across the walls. For a fleeting instant, he looked at her, not as the Duchess, not as the woman tethered to his title, but as herself. The moment passed. "You are safer at distance," he said. "Do not make me repeat this." Something in her broke then, not loudly, not visibly, but with the soft devastation of something long cracked finally shattering. She turned away, her composure unraveling only once the door closed behind her. Alone in the corridor, she pressed a hand to her chest and drew a shaking breath. The portraits of forgotten ancestors stared down, their painted eyes reflecting a lineage of duty over desire. Later, in her chamber, she loosened her gown with trembling fingers. Outside, the storm clawed at the windows. Within, the silence was unbearable. She walked to the writing desk and found his handwriting. A letter unopened, the royal crest impressed in wax. He had not told her of this. The seal bore the mark of King George himself. Something about it felt ominous, heavy with the same unspoken burden she saw in his eyes. She reached for it, hesitated, and drew her hand back. Instead, she lit a single candle and sat before the mirror. Her reflection looked foreign to her, eyes dim, lips parted as though perpetually on the verge of apology. She thought of the life she once imagined: music, laughter, companionship. Instead, she had received the cold glory of a title and a husband who could not bear her presence. Below, a door closed. Footsteps receded. The Duke was leaving again, as he always did when night deepened, riding alone into the moors, where rain washed away whatever memories still clung to him. She wondered if he thought of her at all. She rose, walked to the window, and watched the faint outline of his horse vanish into darkness. A single line escaped her lips, almost prayer, almost curse. "Then go, my lord. But do not ask me to wait forever." The candle's flame quivered as though startled by her voice. Then silence. Hours passed before the house fell into true sleep. The letter still lay on his desk, unopened, its wax glinting faintly in the dying firelight. And though neither of them knew it yet, the words within would change everything, binding their fates not by affection but by peril. Far beyond the manor walls, where the rain thinned into mist, a rider approached with orders sealed and deadly. By dawn, Ravensmere would awaken not to silence but to consequence. The scandal began with a rose. Crimson, fragrant, and laid upon her writing desk like a confession, or a trap. Lady Eleanor found it at dawn, when the manor still slept beneath the hush of early rain. It should have been beautiful, a small mercy in her grey world, yet her breath caught in dread. The Duke never sent roses. His affection did not bloom in gestures, it froze in silence. So who then had placed it there? By mid-morning, Ravensmere stirred with whispers. Servants exchanged glances as they passed through corridors heavy with speculation. The Duchess had received a secret token. Some claimed they saw a carriage leave the gates at midnight. Others swore a letter had arrived in a gentleman's hand. Truth mattered little. The scent of scandal was enough to draw blood. Eleanor stood at the window, the rose in her palm trembling with each breath. A single drop of dew fell from its petal onto her wrist, gleaming like gilt. She had lived long enough among the aristocracy to understand the cruelty of perception, how swiftly pity turned into poison. Once they had whispered that she was unloved. Now they would whisper something worse. She turned as the door opened. Mrs. Henshaw, her elderly maid, curtsied with hesitation. "Your Grace, there are riders at the gate." "His Grace has returned from London." Her heart leapt and fell in the same instant. It had been nearly a fortnight since she'd seen him, and in that time the silence had grown unbearable. She had imagined his absence as a reprieve, yet his presence still carried the weight of judgment. "Thank you," she murmured, steadying herself. "Tell the housekeeper to prepare his study." Moments later, the Duke of Ravensmere strode into the entrance hall, rain dripping from his coat, his expression dark as the clouds behind him. He dismissed his attendants with a flick of his hand. The air shifted, the kind of silence that preceded a storm. "I trust the manor has not burned in my absence," he said curtly. Eleanor met his gaze, her chin lifted though her pulse raced. "Not yet, my lord. Though I hear the embers of gossip burn quite well without your aid." His eyes narrowed. "And what ember would that be?" "The rose," she said simply, holding it out. "It seems someone believes I am worthy of beauty even if you do not." The words escaped before she could temper them. For a heartbeat the world seemed to still. Then came the crack in his composure, slight but unmistakable. "Where did you find it?" "On my desk." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You are certain no one saw you receive it?" She frowned. "Why should it matter?" "Because it was not I who sent it." The truth landed like thunder. The rose, innocent in its silence, now carried the weight of betrayal neither had spoken nor committed. His hand tightened on his glove, knuckles whitening. "Do you have any notion what they will say in town? That my wife entertains admirers while I serve the crown? That the Duke of Ravensmere cannot command his own household?" Her reply trembled, soft but steady. "Perhaps if you had ever commanded my heart, they would not think it available." Something raw flashed across his face, gone as swiftly as it came. He turned away, pacing toward the hearth. "You know nothing of command," he said quietly. "Nor of the cost of loyalty." Then teach me, she whispered. If loyalty is your cage, show me the bars that bind you. He stopped, shoulders rigid. You ask for truths that would destroy you. Then let them. For the first time he faced her without armor. The firelight caught the scar that curved faintly along his jaw, one he had never spoken of. The crown owns my silence, he said. There are debts from the war that were paid not in coin but in conscience. There are men who would see Ravensmere fall, and they will not hesitate to use you to do it. Her breath faltered. Me? A duchess's virtue is a fragile thing, he said bitterly. Easier to tarnish than defend. If they wish to wound me, they will do it through you. Then why push me away? She asked, voice breaking. If danger lies beyond, why exile me into it? He looked at her as if the question itself hurt. Because if you stay close, they will not aim for me, they will aim for you. The confession lingered like smoke, heavy and unresolved. She wanted to hate him, but beneath the frost she saw something almost tender, a man terrified not of scandal but of loss. That evening the manor seemed to breathe differently. The servants went about their duties with uneasy haste. The Duke retreated to his study, and Eleanor to the solitude of her chamber. She sat before the window, the rose beside her, its petals beginning to wilt. Somewhere deep within the house the grandfather clock struck midnight. Each chime echoed like a countdown to something unnamed. When she could no longer bear the silence, she rose and wandered toward the west wing, where the Duke often kept himself until dawn. His study door was ajar, light spilling in thin golden ribbons across the corridor. She hesitated, then stepped closer. He sat at his desk, the royal letter open before him, its seal broken. His face was pale, drawn tight with what looked like dread. She saw her name written among the elegant lines of ink. Eleanor? He said without turning. Her heart stumbled. You knew I was here. I always know, he murmured. You tread too softly for a woman who claims defiance. She moved to the desk, eyes scanning the parchment. What is this? A threat, he replied, his tone stripped of emotion. A reminder that the crown remembers its debts. They believe someone within my household has been corresponding with a French envoy. If I cannot disprove it, they will ruin us both. She stared at him, stunned. And you think they mean me? They do not need truth, he said quietly. Only rumor. You are the perfect weapon, beautiful, lonely, and surrounded by silence. The rose on the desk suddenly seemed sinister, as if planted not by affection but by deceit. Eleanor's stomach twisted. Someone wishes to see me destroyed. He finally looked at her, and there was no trace of distance in his gaze now, only fear. No, Eleanor. They wish to see me destroyed. You are simply the means. The clock chimed once more, low and resonant, and neither spoke. The storm outside gathered force, rattling the windows, but it could not drown the sound of her breaking heart. For the first time she understood his distance, not as cruelty but as defense. Yet understanding did not soften the pain. When he reached for her hand, she did not pull away. His touch was warm, human, fragile. Whatever happens, he said quietly, you must trust no one. Not even me. Her lips parted, but before she could speak, a sharp knock split the silence. A servant entered, pale and trembling, holding a parchment sealed in red wax. Forgive me, your grace, the man stammered, but this just arrived, from London. The Duke took it, eyes darkening as he read. Then he looked at Eleanor, the weight of the message reflected in his silence. What does it say? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He folded the letter with deliberate care. It says, he answered at last, that the war I fought has found its way home. The storm came without mercy. Wind battered the stone walls of Ravensmere, shaking the ancient windows until they groaned like old men in pain. Lightning tore across the sky, white and merciless, illuminating a house on the edge of ruin. The hour was late, but no one slept. Servants whispered of London letters and silent arguments behind closed doors. And in the east wing, the Duchess of Ravensmere stood before her husband's locked study, her knuckles white against the polished wood. Alexander, she said, her voice trembling against the thunder. Open the door. No answer came. She struck again, harder this time, the echo swallowed by rain. You cannot keep me outside of this, not anymore. Inside, the Duke sat motionless, the royal decree spread before him. The fire had burned low, its light uneven, casting his face into restless shadow. He had read the same lines a dozen times, yet their meaning cut deeper with each glance. Evidence suggests correspondence with France was carried through the household of Ravensmere. The crown requires your immediate compliance. The handwriting was unmistakable, one of the king's ministers, a man who once owed him loyalty. He rose slowly, fatigue weighing on every movement. His reflection in the dark window stared back like a stranger, eyes hollow, mouth set in the grim line of a man who had lost too much and dared not lose again. When the next strike of thunder split the silence, he crossed the room and unlocked the door. Eleanor stood there, drenched in candlelight, her nightgown gathered at the throat, hair unbound. She looked both fragile and furious. "You meant to leave again," she said, her voice shaking not with fear but betrayal. "I have no choice," he replied quietly. "If I remain, they will drag you through inquiry and ruin. You will not survive the weight of their suspicion. I would rather face suspicion than abandonment." He shut the door behind her, the lock clicking like a sentence passed. "You do not understand," he said. "This is no matter of gossip. The crown seeks blood. They suspect I turned allegiance during the war. That I sold intelligence to France." She stared at him, stunned. "You? That's madness. You nearly died for the king." He smiled without warmth. "And what is loyalty, if not a convenient tale to forget when peace grows dull?" Her eyes filled with disbelief. "Then let them come. Let them accuse you and I will stand beside you. You are not alone." He stepped closer, his expression softening just enough to hurt. "Eleanor, I was never meant to stand beside anyone. I am a man built for solitude and silence. Every secret I have kept, every sin I have buried, it was to protect the realm, not myself. And yet, every time I return to this house, I find it harder to remember which I am serving, the crown or my own cowardice." She moved to him then, slowly, as if nearing a wounded animal. "You speak of duty as if it absolves you," she said. "But it only hides you. You push me away because you fear the world's judgment, not mine." Something inside him cracked. "You think this distance is fear?" he said. "You think I enjoy watching you fade behind these walls, unloved and unguarded? I am keeping you safe from the ruin that follows me." "Then ruin me," she cried, her voice breaking. "Ruin me if that is what it takes for you to feel again." The word struck him harder than any accusation. For the first time he faltered, the careful control slipping. Rain lashed against the windows, and in that fierce rhythm she heard her own heart, reckless, unashamed. She reached for him, her hand brushing the sleeve of his coat. He did not move away. "I buried a woman once," he whispered. "Not in earth but in regret. Her name was Lillian. She was promised to me before the war. When the French advanced on Bruges, I gave the order to burn the port, to cut their supply lines. She was there. I knew, and I gave the order anyway." Eleanor's breath caught, a sob caught between disbelief and horror. "She was not meant to be," he said softly. "And yet, she was the one I could not forget. Every night I see the flames and every morning I wake to ash. When I met you I thought perhaps I could begin again. But love does not forgive a man twice. I will not bury another woman because of me." The fire crackled once, then faded to embers. Eleanor's tears fell soundlessly, each one gleaming in the flicker of light. "You think denying love will save me?" she whispered. "You're wrong. You are saving no one, you are only dying slower." He turned from her, unable to bear the truth in her voice. "Then so be it." But she did not leave. She stepped closer until the space between them vanished. Her fingers brushed his jaw, tracing the scar he so often hid beneath shadow. "You carry ghosts, Alexander," she said softly, "but they do not own you. Let them rest, or they will drag you down before your time." For a moment he closed his eyes. The air between them trembled. He wanted to draw her close, to drown in the warmth he had denied himself, but the habit of restraint was an old and faithful chain. He caught her hand and held it there, against his face, his voice breaking through the silence. "You should not love me." "I already do," she whispered. "And it is far too late to stop." Lightning struck again, filling the room with ghostly light. For the first time the Duke did not retreat. He kissed her palm once with reverence and despair. "If you stay," he said, "they will destroy you to reach me. Then let them try." Their eyes met, two storms colliding, and for that instant the world outside ceased to exist. Then came a pounding at the door, urgent, desperate. The Duke's valet burst in, face pale. "Your Grace," he gasped. "A messenger from London. The investigation has begun. They mean to summon the Duchess for questioning at the palace by week's end." The room froze. Eleanor's hand slipped from his. "Questioning?" she repeated. "On what charge?" "Correspondence," the valet said. "They claim letters were found, coded messages written in your hand." She turned to the Duke, searching his face. "Alexander, tell me this is false." He said nothing. Her voice rose, trembling. Tell me. He stepped forward, the conflict in him tearing every word apart. I destroyed the letters, Eleanor. Weeks ago. But someone must have made copies. They were never yours, they were mine. Her knees weakened, fury and disbelief colliding. Then why in God's name would they bear my name? Because if they accuse me, I am an agent of war, he said hoarsely. If they accuse you, it is treason. Easier to silence a woman than a duke. Her lips parted, a soundless breath of realization. Outside, the wind howled like a beast unchained. He took her shoulders gently, his voice breaking. You must leave Ravensmere tonight. I can protect you only if you disappear. She shook her head. And abandon you to them? Never. Please, he said, a word he had never spoken before. If you stay, I will lose everything, and you. Tears blurred her vision. Then lose everything else, she whispered. But not me. He closed his eyes, his jaw trembling beneath the weight of what love demanded. Then, softly, he said, If I cannot keep you safe, Eleanor, I will destroy the world that dares to touch you. The thunder answered him, and somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled, cold, distant, and final. The knock came before dawn, sharp, unrelenting, and wrong. It cut through the stillness of Ravensmere like a blade, waking the house with a sound that carried the weight of ruin. The Duke was already awake, sitting by the dying fire, hands clasped tightly as though holding the night together. He had not slept. He hadn't dared. When the third knock came, he knew the world he'd built on secrecy and sacrifice had finally reached its breaking point. Your Grace, a voice called through the door, strained with fear. They've come from London. He stood, his body heavy with exhaustion and dread. Through the frost-streaked window, he saw the royal insignia stamped on the carriages that lined the gravel drive. 6 men dismounted in silence. The king's colors fluttered on their sleeves. This was no summons, it was an arrest. He turned, already reaching for his coat, when the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. Eleanor. She appeared in the doorway, pale against the gray morning light. Her eyes were wide, her nightgown thrown hastily beneath a cloak. They're here for me, she said quietly. No, his voice cut through the air like thunder. They are here for me. She shook her head, trembling. The servants heard them speak. They asked for the Duchess of Ravensmere. They said she must be taken to London for questioning. He froze. Every instinct he had honed in war, the reflex to command, to fight, to survive, fell away beneath the single truth that nothing could protect her now. The crown had named its scapegoat. Without a word, he crossed the room and took her hand. You must hide. There's still time. I will not run, she said, her voice steady but her eyes glass bright. If I flee, I am guilty. If I stay, I am your wife. He stared at her, stunned by her courage and terrified of it. Eleanor, they will not show mercy. Then let them show who they truly are, she whispered. But I will not cower in shadows while they destroy my name. The door below burst open, men's boots pounding against marble floors. The Duke's jaw clenched. He stepped in front of her as the guards entered, the lead officer holding a sealed letter. His Majesty commands that the Duchess of Ravensmere be taken to London for immediate inquiry, the man announced. The Duke's hand fell instinctively to his sword, though he knew it was useless. On what authority? The king's own, the officer said evenly. And under suspicion of treasonous correspondence. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice calm though her pulse thundered in her throat. If His Majesty demands my presence, I will answer. But I will not be dragged like a criminal from my home. The officer hesitated. Her composure unsettled him. Even in disgrace, she carried the quiet dignity of a woman born to defy ruin. Alexander turned to her, desperate. Eleanor, I will come with you. She looked at him for a long moment, the ache between them vast and wordless. No, she said softly. You will not. They would only turn their cruelty upon you. I do not care. I do, she whispered, her voice breaking. If I lose my name, I can bear it. But if I lose you to their vengeance, I will never forgive myself. He reached for her, his hand trembling as it brushed her cheek. You should hate me for bringing this upon you. I tried, she said, tears glistening like morning dew. But love has made a fool of me, and I would rather be a fool beside you than a ghost without you. The officer cleared his throat, his discomfort growing. Your Grace, we must depart. The Duke's eyes turned to steel. You will treat her with respect, or I will personally see to your ruin. The man bowed stiffly, though unease flickered in his gaze. As you wish, my lord. Eleanor turned once more toward her husband. "Promise me," she said quietly. "Promise me you will not come to London." He shook his head. "I cannot." "You must," she insisted, voice trembling. "For once in your life, let someone fight for you." The soldiers waited. The clock struck 7. The sound felt like a noose tightening. When they led her away, she did not look back. She could not. If she did, she knew she would never find the strength to go. The carriage wheels cut through the morning mist, carrying her into the gray distance until Ravensmere was only a shadow against the horizon. The Duke stood alone in the courtyard long after the sound of hooves faded. The cold bit through his coat, but he did not move. Somewhere in his chest, something ancient and unyielding began to fracture. Hours passed. Servants whispered. The rain returned, soft at first, then relentless. When the first drops hit the marble steps, he finally turned toward the stables. He saddled his horse himself. No orders, no ceremony. Just motion, quiet, grim, inevitable. By dusk he was already on the road to London. Every mile between Ravensmere and the capital was heavy with ghosts. He thought of her in the carriage, hands clasped, refusing to tremble before her captors. He thought of the king sitting behind gilded walls, condemning innocence to keep his kingdom pure. And he thought of Lillian, her name, her death, her fire, and how, for all his sins, fate had given him one chance to atone, to love even if it destroyed him. When night fell, London rose before him, vast, smoke-choked and glimmering with cruel promise. He entered through the north gate unnoticed, hood drawn low. The streets were slick with rain, the lamps burning dim in the fog. He rode past Westminster, where the bells tolled in hollow rhythm, and down toward the Thames, where whispers of the court's intrigue bled into the river mist. Somewhere within those stone walls, Eleanor waited, accused, isolated, and unbroken. He dismounted at the edge of Whitehall and pressed a coin into a watchman's hand. "Where do they keep the accused of the crown?" The man hesitated. "In the south wing, my lord. The old council rooms. But they're guarded day and night." The Duke nodded once, his jaw tight. "Then I'll have to make the night very long." He slipped into the shadows, his mind already sharp with resolve. For years, he had fought battles for kings who never bled and causes that never loved him back. But this was different. This was war for the only thing that had ever made his heart tremble. As he moved through the narrow alleys, thunder rolled again in the distance, echoing like a heartbeat through the dark. He thought of her voice, steady even in fear, and of her final words, "Let someone fight for you." He smiled faintly, bitterly. "You should have known better, Eleanor," he murmured. "I was never a man who could stay away." The bell struck midnight. He looked up toward the looming palace, its spires piercing the storm clouds like blades. Somewhere beyond those walls, she waited for judgment. And in that single moment, drenched in rain and fury, the Duke of Ravensmere swore his own. If the crown wished for blood, it would have his, but not hers. The night swallowed his vow whole, and with it, the last trace of the man he used to be. The first scream shattered the silence before dawn. Not of pain, but of defiance. Eleanor's voice, steady and fierce, echoed down the stone corridors of Whitehall's lower chambers. "You may strip me of my title," she declared, "but you will never name me traitor." Her words rang out, clear as church bells through the damp air. The guards flinched. Even they were unaccustomed to such courage from a woman meant to bow her head in disgrace. High above, in the abandoned servants' hall, Alexander stood cloaked in shadow, listening to the sound of her voice. For hours he had searched, bribed, and threatened his way through the labyrinth of the king's justice, and now, at last, he had found her. But finding her meant facing the truth he had long buried, that all the blood on his hands, all the lies he'd told in service to the crown, had led to this, the woman he loved chained in his stead. The door to her chamber creaked open. The officer entered, carrying a parchment heavy with royal seals. "Lady Ravensmere," he said coldly, "you have one chance to confess your guilt. Refuse, and you will be sentenced without appeal." She met his gaze with quiet fire. "Then let your king confess his own sins first." The man hesitated, unsettled. Behind him, another guard shifted nervously. Outside, the wind howled down the corridors like a chorus of ghosts. Alexander moved. He descended the servants' stairs like a shadow unfurling through the dark. The torches flickered as he passed, and his heart beat a steady drum, measured, controlled, lethal. Every step toward her was a vow he could never undo. When he reached the final corridor, he found 2 sentries posted at her door. "By order of the crown, no one enters," one said, stepping forward. Alexander drew his hood back slowly. The torchlight caught the cold gleam in his eyes. "Do you know who I am?" he asked softly. Recognition dawned, and fear with it. Your Grace. Then you know what I am capable of? He interrupted, voice low as thunder before a storm. Open the door. They hesitated only a second before obeying. The Duke stepped inside, and the door closed behind him with the finality of fate. Eleanor turned. For a heartbeat, she thought she had conjured him out of desperation. His face was drawn, his dark hair damp from rain, his coat spattered with mud and blood alike. Alexander, she whispered, disbelief and relief crashing together. He crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands, shackles and all. I told you to wait for me, he said hoarsely. You told me to stay away, she replied, a trembling smile breaking through her exhaustion. And you never listened to your own commands. He exhaled, something between a laugh and a sob. No, not where you are concerned. She touched his cheek gently. You should not have come. And leave you here to face their judgment alone? His voice darkened. I have done enough running from the truth, Eleanor. Tonight it ends. The sound of boots echoed down the hall. The officer's voice carried, seal the south wing. No one leaves until the prisoner is secured. Eleanor's eyes widened. They'll kill you if they find you here. He looked at her, calm and resolute. Then I'll make certain they have reason to remember why. Before she could answer, he drew a folded letter from his coat and pressed it into her palm. This is the proof of your innocence, the king's correspondence with his informants. It bears his seal. It will clear your name. She shook her head. If I take this, they'll know it came from you. They'll hang you for treason. They already would, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. At least now my death will mean something worth dying for. The door crashed open. Soldiers poured in, shouting orders. Alexander turned, drawing his sword in one swift motion. The first man lunged, fell. The second hesitated, too slow. Alexander! Eleanor cried, her voice breaking as chaos erupted. He met her gaze once more, and in that instant the world seemed to slow, the torches, the shouts, the clash of steel, all fading beneath the weight of his words. When they ask you what I fought for, he said softly, tell them it was for the only truth I ever believed in, you. Hands seized him from behind. The blow came swift and brutal. He fell to his knees, blood dark against the stone. Eleanor screamed his name, struggling against the guards who held her. Take him, the officer ordered, breathless, rage trembling beneath his voice. Take him to the courtyard. They dragged the Duke through the rain, his coat torn, his breath shallow but steady. The courtyard was a pool of mud and torchlight, the gallows looming like the spine of a nightmare. Eleanor was forced to watch from the balcony above, restrained though she fought like a creature possessed. The officer turned to the crowd of soldiers. By order of His Majesty King George, Alexander Blackthorne, Duke of Ravensmere, is hereby condemned for high treason. Alexander lifted his head, eyes fixed on Eleanor through the storm. The world could fall away and he would still find her. Do you repent? The officer demanded. A slow, broken smile curved the Duke's lips. For believing in your king? Always. For loving her? Never. The rope was raised. The sky cracked open. Lightning tore across the clouds. And in that moment, before the world could take its final breath, a voice broke through the chaos. Stop. The crowd froze. A messenger stumbled forward, soaked to the bone, holding a scroll marked with crimson wax. An order, from the crown itself. The Duke is to be pardoned. The charges are dismissed. The officer snatched the scroll, eyes wide. Impossible. But it was true. The king, faced with the evidence Eleanor had hidden in her sleeve, the seal she had broken when all seemed lost, had no choice but to free the man he once condemned. The rope fell. The guard stepped back. And the Duke, bleeding and breathless, was cut down. Eleanor rushed to him as the courtyard erupted in chaos. She knelt in the mud, cradling his face in her trembling hands. You foolish man, she whispered, tears mingling with rain. You saved me only to destroy yourself. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused but alive. You once said I could not bear to stay away from you, he murmured. You were right. She pressed her forehead to his, sobbing quietly. Then stay. Just stay. The rain softened. The torches hissed out one by one. Around them, the soldiers knelt, not to the king but to the truth they had witnessed. By dawn, the storm had passed. Ravensmere's bell tolled in the distance, a sound of mourning and renewal both. They said the Duke of Ravensmere never fully recovered, that the scars he bore were deeper than flesh. But those who saw him walk beside his duchess through the halls of Ravensmere swore that he smiled differently, no longer the guarded, haunted man of war, but one who had finally found peace in surrender. And though the world would remember him as the duke who defied a king, Eleanor would remember him as the man who whispered, through blood and rain, "Stay away from me," until I could no longer bear to. The candlelight flickered, then died, leaving only the echo of that vow, carried forever on the wind that swept through Ravensmere's gates.